Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and happy Sunday. It is Sunday, May 3rd, 2026, and I am fresh out of church. And while I was in church, I felt very compelled to create this video and share this message. The inspiration comes from a couple of places, a couple of instances and things and just events that have been occurring in my life and just my thought processes in general. So I thought, why don't I just create this video and kind of give you an idea of why I'm doing this. But before I get into it, it's your girl D Green 2.0, and please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hype me up. So this is not going to be a recap. This is one of my life gems that I want to share because I'm not about gatekeeping. I want people to, if you feel you should, just come to a place of acceptance and following your heart. Living good though, you because sometimes when we follow our hearts, if our hearts are in a bad place, that can guide you down the wrong direction. So this is, to clarify, this is for people who are living good, okay? And when I mean by living good, they don't have ill intentions in their soul, okay? In their soul, in their spirit, the core of them is not a malicious, evil, vindictive, vengeful person. Like, you have to be at peace. You don't have to necessarily be the happiest, but be at peace and not, ill-equipped to really go out there and apply these tenets that I'm going to share with you, because that just kind of shows your heart's not aligned and your soul's not aligned in the right place. And so your plane of reality, depending on how you determine what I'm going to share with you, your plane of reality and how you exist can become very chaotic. It can, and you can cause more harm in the world than you can good. So with all of that said, let me just kind of give you the origin of why I wanted to make this video. So if you know me personally, you know I'm very open about my upbringing, my story, the situation with my parents, particularly my mother. My mother, God bless her, she's, as much as she can irritate me, she is my angel. She is definitely a guiding force in my life. I look at my mother and I look at her and I say to myself, I know why I was created to be the way that I was. Okay. And so my mother, she had a very hard childhood. Her mother abandoned her early, and she had to go through a lot of heartache and, just figuring things out in life and bumping her head. Right. And my mother, dealing with abandonment, was also someone, I like to think, based on the stories I've heard, she was a woman before her time. But, because she didn't have the resources or the support or a village around her that really understood her, my mother struggled navigating in the world. And then my mother was a young mother. My mother had her first child at 19, and then I came at 29, and then my little sister came at 32, and then my brother came at, I think my mom was 36. So she had a gap between my older sister and myself. But even with that, the times were not equipped to embolden and empower my mother to live in her full self and really maximize the potential that she, could have exercised in her life. She had some guiding principles also that were in conflict with who she was as a person. Because my mother, when she was raised by foster parents, a lot of them were steeped in the church. And my mother was raised in the Midwest. And if you're familiar with the Midwest, while they're, like I said, they're the fabric of America, very, very good-natured people, principled, but sometimes people from the Midwest can also be stubborn and fixed in their ways. And they are not open to evolving because they subscribe to things that keep them safe, belief systems and religion. That's a whole separate story. But anywho, so my mother, being this person ahead of her time, was essentially like a free spirit if you look at it from the perspective of someone living in today's time. But back then, she was a pariah. She was someone you avoided. People called her crazy. Like my mom, she went through it. She couldn't really be who she was. So my mother, she has 3 daughters. Her youngest son is a boy, but all of us, her 3 girls, we are my mother reincarnated. But I am probably the most like my mother because I openly express and live out how I feel. My mother was a very live out loud person when she felt permitted to be, but over time it kind of beat my mother's spirit down and she became sort of a recluse in her later age. But my mother still lived openly. She didn't care how she spoke, she was, my mama was the shit, okay? She was just living in an era that couldn't, give her the tools that she needed to be her best self. So that's my mother. And like I said before, I live like her. I'm my mother's reincarnate. So on Friday, this is the second story that lends itself to this video. I was shopping and I was checking out, and I'm gonna show you this. This is my keychain. I'm a Gemini, okay? Proud, June, full body Gemini, mind, body, soul, spirit. I believe in all of that. Look into it if you don't really know about Geminis, but I'm a Gemini. And the young lady, she noticed that, and she was also a Gemini. And so immediately, like, there was something in me that when she said that, we made eye contact. And I think this is just the result of me getting older and more like accepting who I am as a person, that I'm becoming more spiritually enlightened and discernment is up. So when I lock eyes with someone, there's like a connection depending on where they are also. If they're aligned with where I am, it's like a connection, like a vibration. So we start talking, and nothing like planned, nothing. We're just talking, and we start talking about life. And I was telling her, I said, yeah, I started speaking about the characteristics of a Gemini. I said, yeah, I'm a, you either love me or you hate me. I am who I am. It took me a while to finally get to a place where I accept that. And I'm tired of trying to prove who I am to people when I already understand who I am, and I'm very comfortable with that. And so she's listening, and I was like, let me ask you a question. You're in college, right? You're probably dealing with people, and you're amongst people that don't understand you. I told her, I was like, if you really look at history, there are great contrarians and people who kind of went against the grain and bucked the system. They're Geminis. I start mentioning how, Kendrick Lamar's a Gemini, Marilyn Monroe's a Gemini, Johnny Depp's a Gemini, Tupac, Biggie, both were Geminis. And I mean, depending on political, I'm not political. I don't speak politically, but Donald Trump is a Gemini. He's going against the grain. He's pissing a lot of people off, but that is Gemini energy. We challenge it. And so another great Gemini that didn't get to fully live out his presidency was John F. Kennedy. So I was just highlighting to her, how Geminis are spirited people. And so by design, we're not going to live like everyone else lives, right? So I'm pouring into this girl, and I say, yeah, like, you're in college. I was like, you're in college, right? You're in your 20s? She said, yes. I said, I got that. I said, you're probably at this stage where you're doing a lot of observing, and you're starting to pull away from people, because I remember where I was in my 20s, getting out of high school, knowing that I had to transform the way that I lived and how I saw things, especially coming from the Midwest, moving to California. I had to look at the world differently. And so I was sharing with her, I said, yeah, you're going to go through that. And I said, and also too, because she was a darker skinned girl, and I'm dark skinned, I said, and you're also going to probably be met with a lot of resistance, and you're going to have a hard time, because how dare you're going to see you navigate in this world as a confident, spirited person, given your astrological sign, but you are a brown girl too. So people are going to really give it to you, because how dare you, a brown girl who looks ethnically black, you can't pass. How dare you ask to be, at the table and to show up unapologetically as you are. So I was just telling her, and she was like, that is so real, because I do deal with that. I feel it, the colorism, and, I show up a certain way, and people kind of like, depending on their mindset, they treat me differently, and I feel it. And so we connected. And so I was just sharing with her, like, stay true to who you are. If you're not trying to be out there hurting people, don't try to go against the grain of who you are in your core, because you're just, as a Gemini, we have to be fully, I can't speak for all Geminis, but generally what I've seen is, as a Gemini, we have to really, really believe in what it is that's in front of us and what we're going through to really commit to it. And if we aren't fully in belief with it, and it goes against our values, that's when you see like the chaos, you see the resistance, you see all of that, even self-destruction. Geminis, well, for me, in my experience, when I wasn't happy with something, if I felt I couldn't change it, that's when I started to destroy myself instead of destroying people. So I was just telling her, like, just be true to who you are, because you don't want to destroy yourself, especially being a young lady in today's times. Being authentic is probably your best weapon, because if you stand true, regardless of what's in front of you, if you believe in a power above all of us, bigger than yourself, you're going to come out on the top. Yeah, you're going to go through some hard things, but you're going to come out on the top. And so this young lady's name was Godly. And I told her, I said, I just felt, the need to really talk to you. And she took a lot from that, and she was happy, and it was a good exchange. So with that being said, I was thinking about it, that exchange, my mother, my upbringing, and the things that I've gone through in life, and where I am now currently at 42. Well, I'm rounding up, I'll be 42 in June. But where I am in life, and how I got here, and how I feel, and why I feel the way that I feel. I have gone through a lot of hardship. I have gone through a lot of heartache. But when I tell you, I probably feel the most enlightened and at peace and happiest that I've ever felt in my life. That is the truth. I sleep better. I eat better. I'm just better. I'm just better. But there are tenets in life, guiding principles that I go by. I am not compromising them at this stage in the game for anyone. And so I want to share these tenets with you all and give you the whys. You'll see. Give you the whys and kind of give you some stories and some reasons why I believe in these 6 things. And there's more beliefs that I have, but I figured these 6 are good summaries of me just making decisions, for my character in my life, and why I'm not compromising that. I don't care who crosses my path. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you feel like you may know. I don't care. You don't walk my path, and so you're not going to dictate my path. Okay? So, all right, let me just stop rambling, and I just wanted to give you the backstory, but let me go into these 6 tenets and tell you what they are and how they help me be a better person in the world and to myself. All right, so my first one, this is helping me protect my peace. The first one is, I do not deal well with people who have a single mind on certain subjects. Not double-minded, but I prefer people being open-minded. What I mean by that is, if you are a person that is a one-dimensional type of thinker, or you believe in binary systems, or you believe that this world is only black and white, and so forth, I'm going to struggle with you existing in my life, because what that tells me is you have a fixed mindset. And with the experiences I've had in life, that is one thing I have learned, is you cannot have a fixed mindset. You have to be open. If time is always evolving and things are always changing, what makes you think the way that you see the world shouldn't change, and the way that you look at certain subjects shouldn't change? So that is the first tenet. If you have that type of mindset, you're not for me. Okay, that's how I protect my peace. So if you are someone that I probably at one point in time hung out with or clung to, and then all of a sudden you see me pulling away from you, if you think like that, that's probably one of the reasons why I pull away from you, is because I've already seen how you think. You're not open-minded, and I don't want to deal with that. I'm not raising my daughter to be closed-minded, so I can't have closed-mindedness in my space. Okay? Number 2, those who lack awareness and accountability, that means that they lack in living in their truth, understanding, and knowing their whys. Okay? So, one of the things I tell my daughter is, please don't do anything in life that you are not willing to suffer the consequences for, or, the benefits, whatever they are. But whatever decision you make, you need to be rooted in that and understand why you made that decision. I don't do well with people who cannot understand if they did something, if it was a lapse in judgment, if, maybe they were jealous, maybe they were weak, whatever. If they made that decision, and then if that decision impacts me or you or whatever, and then you go to ask this person, well, why did you do it? And they can't explain it. No, I can't, my spirit can't sit well with you, because that tells me that you're not at a stage in your mindset and in your soul where you are living in your truth, And therefore, you can't take accountability for your actions because you haven't had that reckoning yet. You're just out here recklessly living, and you're not, holding yourself accountable or aware of how you're showing up in the world and how that's affecting other people. So if you're a person like that, no, automatically rule you out. All right, so number 3, those who listen, process, and understand one side of a conflict. Come on now, this should be self-explanatory, hopefully. But if you are a person that lives the way that I explained earlier in the video, you understand that people are complicated, right? Animals are the only things that are true to their nature, most animals and insects, but people are complicated. So if two people are intertwined in a conflict, right, and you find yourself just trying to understand and go off of one side of the story in that conflict, then that again goes back to that you being narrow-minded. How are you to say that one person is more right than the other person if it erupted into a conflict? It took 2 parties to tango, right? You know how they say there's always 3 sides to the story: their side, your side, and then somewhere in the middle is the truth. Well, that's the adage. That's what it is. If you are the type of person that just automatically goes with one side of a story because of a conflict, I mean, hey, maybe you're just fiercely loyal. I get that. However, you have to understand that maybe you are just very biased and you choose to remain biased. So if that's what it is, then it goes back to number 2. Then you could say that. Say, I'm being biased. I acknowledge my biases. I'm guilty of it sometimes. I'm not perfect, but I always can explain to you that I'm being biased. I'm coming from a place of conviction and I'm not going to be moved on this. However, if there's conflict and if you care and if you know how people can be, try to hear all sides. Don't just go with one side. All right. So number 4, this is very important because it goes back to what I was talking earlier about with my mother. Those who fail to recognize and break certain patterns of familial dysfunction. So if you notice that there is a pattern of something, whatever that may be, that you've noticed in your family or a particular person in your family or someone that you're like, but you have not yourself tried to challenge that or question that, and not necessarily like raise hell, but become curious. Why is it that such and such happens? Why is it that this has occurred? Why is it that, if you don't question that, and you are okay with just going along to get along because you want to do that for the sake of loyalty and tradition, but if it's causing like havoc in your life, that's a problem. That is a problem. I'll give you a real world example as it pertains to me. So like I said, I grew up very, I had some hardships, and I noticed a lot of things that were going on in my community, right? So I wanted to understand the why. So I personally took it upon myself to study the field of psychology because I needed to understand why it was harder for certain people in certain groups versus others. And so instead of just, going with church and going with faith, I wanted to intellectualize and really, really pay attention to how the world impacts people and why certain people in certain groups struggle more than the other. And so that was me taking the step to reverse a familial dysfunctional pattern. I didn't want to be blind to the ignorance and the issues in my family and carry that on into the next generation. I wanted to understand it. So if you're the type of person that you have not noticed that there is a pattern of familial dysfunction and you have not tried to correct that or change it, I can't deal with you. Again, that goes back to living in your truth and knowing your whys, right? So yeah, protect your peace and be all with that. All right, so number 5, those who once they know refuse to grow. It's like they say, when you know better, you do better. That's as simple as it is. If you notice that there has been something that you have been doing and it hasn't necessarily been right, but you have not tried to course correct, you're comfortable with just doing it because you're a creature of habit, I don't want to be around you. Again, I'm raising a child. So people I have around me, she is going to see that. You think kids are paying attention to how you show up in the world and how you allow people to show up in your world? Kids are paying attention to that. My daughter tells me every time, and because I allow her the space to communicate. But that's what I'm saying. I'm responsible for her life. So if you are that person that you're not trying to grow or change, because I'm teaching my daughter, people aren't perfect, but once you realize you've made a mistake or you've been doing things wrong and you refuse to course correct, I don't need you around, because you're going to continue to poison the well, right? And we can't have that, especially if we want to grow. All right. The last thing, those who refuse to understand and respect those who differ in opinion. You don't have to like what someone says. You don't even necessarily have to agree with it. But if you cannot offer a space of respecting their perspective, then again, you are a fixed mindset, one-minded, just one-dimensional type of person. We're people, right? And so we're not all going to necessarily agree. That's why it's hard for certain people to talk about politics. That's why it's hard for people to talk about certain subjects, religion, etc., because they're already closed off. And I get it. Yeah, some people want to stay true to themselves and they don't want to seem as fickle. No, it's not about being fickle. It's about being flexible. Okay? I'm going to tell you a real life story, and it does kind of borders on politics, but this told me then how I was. I was like, oh, well, I guess that just makes me a pariah. But there were people that understood me in this situation. So when I was in college, I was on student government. And this was around the time where Trump rescinded DACA. And that's when I saw that, college settings are very liberal, and sometimes people who think liberally think emotionally. They're not rationalizing where they're coming from. And I get it. I'm not on one political side or the other. I'm just saying, for me, I mean, quite frankly, I think we need to change our political system, because we only have two parties. And if I'm telling you, in this video that people are bigger than just two decisions, then there you go. However, that's not how it's designed for me to vote. So that's why I vote when I vote, how I vote when the time comes around. But going back to that story. So in student government, at the time, I was the vice president of student government. And so I had a prominent role, right? And I knew that. My role that I was given, I represent a certain population in student government. They say that each person is supposed to represent, a certain ratio, depending on how many people are on the board or whatever. And so for us, I think it was like 1,000 person to one representative. And so for me, I took into consideration the demographic I was representing. And so when he rescinded DACA, there was an initiative presented by a certain group of students to show solidarity for the students on campus, right? Okay, well, this is an intellectual environment. This is education. And, if we're on student government, we're supposed to be neutral, right? It's not supposed to be laced in emotion. So I, being the vice president at the time, I said, okay, before we pass on this initiative, let's take into consideration that we are in East County, because I lived in San Diego at the time. And if you know how East County is, East County leans a certain way, right? And so I said, this school is present in East County, and we do have, not the masses, but we do have a certain group of people who may agree with Trump's decision to rescind DACA. So before we decide on just doing this initiative for solidarity, let's kind of weigh out the pros and cons, right, on why we should not pass it. So when it came time to pass, because I spoke up, I gave space for the students who understood where I was coming from to vote with confidence. And there were a couple meetings we had to have, and the staff member advisor, she leaned more towards the students that wanted to advocate for that initiative. So she had lost all of her scruples, and it became personal for her. So her and I bumped heads, because we're both adults. Like, I was an older student. We're both adults. And I can just see it in her. I said, you're kind of biased. Like, that's not the role for you to have as the advisor of a student government who's supposed to represent the voices of all students, not just a particular group. But that showed me then, okay, I tend to, some people say, buck the system, go against the grain, weigh out all pros and cons, play devil's advocate. I depending on the situation, I'm going to be in that direction, because I understand how complicated people are, right? So anywho, if you can't respect people's opinions and not get so emotional about it because it doesn't align with your core values, you may want to question how you show up in the world and how that impacts people. Maybe you're operating from a place of just me and not we. And you got to be able to compartmentalize when that should be applicable and when it shouldn't be applicable. So yeah, those are my 6 tenets, my guiding principles. Some of them, because I have more, but these are some core ones that allow me to sleep at night, allow me to flourish and thrive in spite of what I deal with, allow for me to continue to have faith, allow for me to treat people fairly. I can't ask for fairness and justice if I myself don't yield it out in the world. And so if you find yourself, if you find yourself, struggling because of the state of affairs, or maybe you're looking at certain groups you hang around, people that you know, things you familiarized yourself with, and you're questioning that, there's a reason. So don't go against that. Okay, always be true to you. It's easy for us to just go along to get along because we feel that's going to get us to the next level. Trust me, I've done that before. And if it goes against your guiding principles, if you're in the right headspace, it's not going to sit well with you. So just be true to yourself. That's the best thing I could say. And be honest about where you stand, especially if you're not trying to be malicious. There's always a way to say things. There's always a way to do things, but always do it in truth and being true to yourself, all right? And trying to be good to the world. There's a lot of pieces of shit out here that think they're actually doing the Lord's work, and they're not. So let's not be that, okay? All right, y'all, I'm going to get some lunch so I can, digest the food and get my workout in. I've gained a little bit of weight and I need to lose some weight before my event on the 17th. I will talk to you guys more about that later. But for those that follow me, I appreciate you. God bless you. I love you. Thank you so much for the support. Make sure you go out there and make your imprint on the world and just be good to the world and be good to yourself. All right, I'm going to leave you at that. Peace and blessings, y'all. Bye.